At dinner, my fiance calmly said, "Put my name on your $1.2 million condo deed, or we don't walk down that aisle. You have 1 week." I smiled and pulled out my phone, scrolling past my wedding planner's number to dial Oceanic Cruises instead. Sierra's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her wine glass as she watched me, clearly expecting surrender. She'd chosen her moment carefully. 3 weeks before our wedding, with $25,000 already paid to the Azure Estate venue, custom invitations sent to 200 guests, and her dress hanging in my closet. The calculated timing wasn't lost on me. "Yes, I'd like to book a private suite on the Pacific Dream for next month," I said clearly into the phone, watching her honey gold eyes widen. "Can we transfer the full credit from an existing event cancellation? The Thorne Vance wedding at the Azure Estate, November 18th. Yes, cancel the entire ballroom reservation and apply it to the cruise immediately." The color drained from her face as she realized what was happening. This wasn't surrender. It was the opening move in a game she didn't know we were playing. What Sierra didn't understand was that I'd spent 15 years building my career as a senior tech consultant, specializing in risk assessment and strategic planning for Fortune 500 companies. I'd negotiated million-dollar contracts, identified vulnerabilities in corporate structures, and saved companies from hostile takeovers. Her ultimatum wasn't a relationship crisis. It was a poorly executed acquisition attempt, and I'd seen it coming for months. The signs had been there since that Sunday lunch with her mother Evelyn 3 months ago. We'd been discussing my recent promotion to partner at Nexus Consulting when Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Alex, dear, Sierra tells me your lakefront condo is completely paid off. That's wonderful, but have you considered what happens to your assets if something unexpected occurs before the wedding?" I'd maintained my pleasant expression while mentally cataloging the threat assessment. Evelyn Vance, widowed 8 years ago, living off diminishing savings in a cramped apartment while maintaining appearances of wealth. Sierra, her only child, working in luxury PR, but barely covering her expenses despite the designer wardrobe. The math was simple. They saw my $1.2 million condo, my investment portfolio worth another $800,000, and my annual income of $350,000 as their retirement plan. "Everything is properly structured through my estate attorney," I'd replied smoothly. "My nephew Leo is the primary beneficiary until marital status changes, at which point we'll establish appropriate protections." Evelyn's smile had frozen. "Surely Sierra should be protected now, as a gesture of good faith. You could add her to the deed immediately." That was strike one. Strike two came when Sierra started leaving real estate documents around the condo, articles about financial abuse in relationships, and why separate property is toxic to marriage. Strike three was discovering she'd scheduled a consultation with a property lawyer without telling me, which I only knew because the confirmation email went to our shared calendar by mistake. I'd spent the next 2 months quietly preparing. First, I'd move $400,000 from my accessible accounts into a trust that couldn't be touched without multiple signatures from my legal team. Then I'd had Richard Steinberg, my attorney since my first tech startup exit, draft 3 different versions of prenuptial agreements, one generous, one standard, and one that would trigger if any legal action was taken against my assets before marriage. I'd also hired a private investigator to do a complete background check on both Sierra and Evelyn, which revealed something fascinating. Evelyn had tried this exact same maneuver with her deceased husband's brother 5 years ago, claiming emotional distress and demanding a settlement. She'd lost, but only after a costly legal battle. "Did you just cancel our wedding?" Sierra's voice cracked, bringing me back to the present moment in my dining room overlooking Lake Michigan. "No," I replied, standing up and pocketing my phone. "I transferred our deposit into a non-refundable solo cruise package. The wedding venue is no longer booked. You made your position clear. My deed or no wedding. I'm simply accepting your terms. No deed transfer, no wedding. You have 1 week to decide if you want to discuss this like adults, with proper legal counsel and a fair prenuptial agreement, or if you want to continue with threats." She stood so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood. "You're really going to throw away our entire relationship over property?" "You're the one who made property a condition of marriage," I countered. I'm just better at negotiating than you expected. The next morning, she was gone when I woke up, but her key was still on the counter. I called in sick, something I'd done exactly twice in 15 years, and spent the day implementing phase 2 of my strategy. First, I had the building security company change all access codes and reprogram the elevator permissions. Then I met with Richard to file paperwork, establishing that Sierra was a month-to-month tenant who had been given verbal notice to vacate. We also prepared a cease and desist letter in case Evelyn tried to escalate legally. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, while I was reviewing a client's cybersecurity protocol, my assistant knocked on my door. Alex, there's a courier here with legal documents requiring signature. The envelope was from Brennan and Associates, a law firm I recognized as bottom feeders who took contingency cases. Inside was a demand for equitable interest, claiming that Sierra's 18 months of residence, her emotional labor in planning the wedding, and her contributions to household management entitled her to 50% ownership of my condo and investment accounts. They gave me 7 days to comply. I photographed every page and sent them to Richard, then called him immediately. They're actually trying it, I said. Richard laughed. Actually laughed. This is amateur hour, Alex. She has no standing. She's not common law. She's paid maybe $3,000 in utilities over 18 months while living rent-free in a $1 million property. This is intimidation, not litigation. Perfect, I said. Send them a counter invoice for 18 months of market rate rent. The going rate for a 3-bedroom lakefront condo is what, $8,000 a month? Closer to $9,500, Richard corrected. Minus her utility contributions, she owes you about $168,000 in back rent. I'll have the demand letter ready within the hour. That evening, I came home to find Evelyn's Mercedes parked in my building's visitor spot. They were both in my condo, Sierra packing, Evelyn supervising. I had expected this and had already activated the security camera app on my phone to record everything. You're really going to play hardball with lawyers? Evelyn snarled when she saw me. My daughter gave you the best years of her life. Your daughter lived rent-free in a $1 million condo for 18 months, I replied calmly. If we're talking about value exchange, she received approximately $170,000 in free housing. I received someone who tried to legally steal my assets. I think I'm the one who should be filing claims. Sierra looked up from the suitcase she was packing, tears streaming down her face. I loved you, Alex. This was supposed to be about security, not money. Security is what a prenuptial agreement provides, I said. What you demanded was ownership of assets you didn't earn, couldn't afford, and had no legal right to. That's not security, that's theft. Evelyn stepped forward. You're going to regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording icon. Please do. I'll be happy to share this conversation, along with your fraudulent legal demands and the background check showing your previous attempts at asset seizure with your late husband's family. Did you think I wouldn't do due diligence on someone trying to marry me? The color drained from Evelyn's face. She hadn't expected me to know about her past legal battles. You investigated us? In standard risk assessment, I replied. The same investigation that revealed you were cut out of your husband's will for financial manipulation, that you've been coaching Sierra on asset acquisition since our third date, and that you've been documenting our relationship specifically to build a legal case. Your text messages to Sierra about securing the bag were particularly illuminating. Sierra's tears stopped. You went through my phone? No, but you used my iPad for your iMessage when your phone died last month. You never logged out. Everything synced. The silence was deafening. They both knew they were beaten. I had documentation, legal precedent, and most importantly, I had resources they couldn't match. Evelyn grabbed Sierra's arm. We're leaving. This isn't over. Actually, it is, I said. You have 24 hours to remove all belongings, or they'll be placed in storage at your expense. Any further legal action will be met with a countersuit for attempted fraud, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Richard Steinberg will be handling all communication from this point forward. They left without another word. I immediately called my building security to escort them out and ensure they didn't return without supervision. Then I poured myself a scotch, the 21-year-old Balvenie I'd been saving for my wedding night. and stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. The social media explosion started within hours. Sierra posted a carefully crafted victim narrative on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter simultaneously. According to her version, I was a controlling narcissist who had stolen our wedding deposits, thrown her out homeless, and refused to share my wealth despite promising marriage. She tagged mutual friends, colleagues, even some of my clients she'd met at company events. My phone exploded with messages, some supportive, most judgmental. My own mother called, confused and hurt, that I hadn't told her the wedding was off. But I'd learned from the best strategic minds in tech. Never respond emotionally to a crisis. Document, analyze, then execute with precision. I spent 2 hours crafting my response, not a defensive rant or emotional plea, but a simple factual statement with attached evidence. I posted it across all platforms. For those concerned about recent posts regarding my ended engagement, the relationship terminated when my former fiancé demanded property ownership transfer as a condition of marriage. When I declined and suggested standard prenuptial negotiations, her family's attorney sent the attached demand for 50% of my premarital assets. I've included the legal documents for transparency. I wish Sierra well and hope she finds the security she's seeking. I attached the demand letter from Brennan and Associates, the response from Richard showing her potential rent liability, and a screenshot of the venue confirming the deposit transfer was legal and within my contractual rights. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. The narrative shifted within hours. Comments on Sierra's posts changed from "he's a monster" to "wait, you sued him for his house before the wedding?" My client who'd been tagged actually called me. "Jesus, Alex, she tried to take your condo? That's insane. Don't worry about this affecting our contract. If anything, I respect you more for protecting your assets." Sierra deleted her posts within 48 hours, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots circulated in our social circles, particularly among the tech community where asset protection was standard practice. 3 of my colleagues reached out with their own similar stories, thanking me for handling it publicly and professionally. A week later, I was sitting in Richard's office reviewing the final documentation when he said something that stuck with me. "You know what the difference was between you and them? They thought this was about emotion and manipulation. You knew it was about contracts and leverage. They brought feelings to a legal fight." He was right. Every move Sierra and Evelyn made was based on the assumption that I'd caved to emotional pressure, the wedding timeline, the social embarrassment, the fear of being alone at 38 years old. They didn't understand that I'd spent my entire career learning to separate feelings from strategic decisions. In tech consulting, emotional decisions kill companies. In relationships, apparently, they just kill trust. The cruise was scheduled for 3 weeks after the original wedding date. I spent those weeks methodically closing every loop. I had a professional cleaning service deep clean the condo, removing any trace of Sierra's presence. I donated the wedding gifts that had already arrived to a local charity, getting tax receipts for each donation. I even sent personalized notes to the would-be wedding guests, explaining briefly that the wedding was canceled due to irreconcilable differences regarding financial planning and thanking them for their intended presence. The day before the cruise, I received one final text from Sierra. "I was wrong. Mom pushed me into this. I miss us. Can we talk when you get back?" I stared at the message for a long moment. 6 months ago, I would have immediately called her, desperate to fix things. Now, I recognized it for what it was. Not genuine remorse, but another strategy. The legal threat had failed, the social media campaign had backfired, and now she was trying emotional manipulation. I forwarded the message to Richard with a note. "Please add this to the documentation file." Then I blocked her number. The cruise itself was transformative in ways I didn't expect. I'd chosen a Pacific route that stopped in Alaska, Vancouver, and Seattle. 7 days of complete disconnection from the drama, surrounded by strangers who knew nothing about my canceled wedding or viral social media posts. I spent mornings in the ship's business center, working on a new consulting framework I'd been developing. Afternoons were for reading, not business books, but fiction I'd been meaning to tackle for years. Evenings, I'd sit on my balcony with a whiskey, watching the ocean and thinking about how close I'd come to financial disaster. On day 5, I met Margaret, a 60-years-old attorney from Boston who was celebrating her divorce. Over dinner, she shared her story. 30 years of marriage to a man who'd slowly drained her accounts, taken credit for her career success, and left her for his secretary the moment she made partner at her firm. The only thing that saved me, she said, was keeping my premarital investments separate. He got half of everything else, but that initial nest egg let me rebuild. Smart, I said, and told her my story. She laughed so hard she nearly choked on her wine. Oh, honey, you didn't dodge a bullet. You dodged a nuclear missile. Let me tell you something. When someone shows you who they are before marriage, believe them. After marriage, it only gets worse. We spent the rest of the cruise trading war stories and strategies. She introduced me to her friend group, all successful professionals who'd learned expensive lessons about protecting assets. One was a surgeon who'd lost his practice in a divorce. Another, a real estate developer whose ex-wife had claimed his premarital properties through a loophole in their prenup. Each story reinforced the same lesson. Emotional decisions in financial matters lead to disaster. When I returned home, there was a pile of mail waiting, including a thick envelope from Evelyn's new attorney. Apparently, Brennan and Associates had dropped them after Richard's response. This letter was more carefully crafted, suggesting mediation to resolve property disputes arising from domestic partnership. Richard handled it with a simple response. No domestic partnership existed, no mediation required, further contact will be considered harassment. 3 months passed peacefully. I threw myself into work, landing 2 major contracts that would set my income for the next 2 years. I started dating casually. Nothing serious, just dinner with women who understood that business and pleasure required separate accounts. The condo felt like mine again, no longer haunted by arguments about ownership and equity. Then came the unexpected twist. I was at a tech conference in San Francisco when I ran into Derek, Sierra's cousin, who worked in venture capital. He pulled me aside during a coffee break. "Alex, I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Sierra and Aunt Evelyn are in serious trouble. After your situation went public, 3 other guys came forward with similar stories. Evelyn had coached Sierra to do this before, twice. Both times the guys paid settlements to make it go away quietly. You're the first one who fought back publicly." "And?" I asked, though I could guess where this was going. "One of them is pressing charges for extortion. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is investigating. They found a pattern. Evelyn identifies targets through Sierra's PR work, coaches her through relationships, then they execute the asset grab before marriage. It's actually a sophisticated operation. They've allegedly taken over $2 million from various men over the past 5 years. I felt a cold satisfaction wash over me. Good, maybe other men will learn to protect themselves. Derek nodded. You documenting everything and going public is what gave the others courage to come forward. Your evidence is apparently key to the federal case. 2 weeks later, I received a subpoena to provide documentation for the federal investigation. Richard and I spent a full day with FBI agents, walking through every text, email, and legal document. The agent leading the investigation, a sharp woman named Agent Huang, was particularly interested in the timeline. You started documenting 3 months before the ultimatum, she noted. Why? Pattern recognition, I explained. In my consulting work, I identify system vulnerabilities, Evelyn's questions about my assets, Sierra's sudden interest in property law, the escalating pressure. It all followed a predictable pattern of asset acquisition strategy. I documented it the same way I document a potential security breach for a client. Agent Huang smiled. Your documentation is the most comprehensive we've seen. Most victims don't realize what's happening until it's too late. The federal case made headlines 6 months later. Mother-daughter duo charged in multi-million-dollar romance fraud scheme ran in the Wall Street Journal. The article detailed how Evelyn and Sierra had systematically targeted successful men through Sierra's PR connections, extracted assets through emotional manipulation and legal threats, and moved on to the next target. 5 victims were identified, with losses totaling $3.2 million. I received dozens of messages from men thanking me for exposing the scheme. Several shared their own stories of similar attempts, now recognized as fraud rather than relationship issues. A men's rights organization even invited me to speak at their conference, though I declined. This wasn't about gender wars. It was about recognizing and preventing financial predation. The trial was swift. With documented patterns, multiple victims, and my comprehensive evidence file, the prosecution had an easy case. Evelyn was sentenced to 8 years for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and extortion. Sierra got 3 years and mandatory restitution to her victims. The judge specifically cited my documentation as crucial to establishing the premeditated nature of their scheme. I was in my office when the verdicts came down, reviewing a new client proposal. Richard called with the news, but I felt surprisingly little. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a sense of closure. The $25,000 wedding deposit I'd converted to a cruise had saved me from losing hundreds of thousands more. A year later, I was having dinner with a new client, discussing their company's expansion into Asian markets, when she mentioned something that stopped me cold. "You're the Alex Thorne, aren't you? The one from that federal fraud case?" I nodded, prepared for judgment. Instead, she smiled. "My brother went through something similar. Your case gave him the courage to fight back. He saved his company because of your example. Thank you." It's been 2 years now since that dinner where Sierra demanded my condo deed. The condo's value has increased to $1.4 million thanks to the lakefront development boom. My portfolio has grown to over $1.2 million through strategic investments I could make because I wasn't paying legal fees for a messy divorce. The consulting firm made me senior partner, partly because of my demonstrated risk assessment skills that had become company legend. I'm dating someone new, Catherine, a financial analyst who insisted on signing a relationship agreement before we even became exclusive. She owns her own condo, maintains separate accounts, and we split dinners based on who chooses the restaurant. It's the healthiest relationship I've ever had because it's built on mutual respect, not financial entanglement. Last month, I received a letter forwarded through Richard's office. It was from Sierra, writing from federal prison. She apologized, claimed she'd been manipulated by her mother, and asked if I could find it in my heart to forgive her. She mentioned she'd found faith, was getting therapy, and understood the harm she'd caused. I read it twice, then filed it with all the other documentation. Forgiveness isn't mine to give. That's between her and the men she defrauded. But I did send a response through Richard. I hope you use this time to build genuine skills and real value, so you never need to try taking someone else's. The $25,000 cruise saved me from $1 million mistake. It was the best investment I ever made. The cruise line, Oceanic Cruises, actually reached out to me after the case made news, offering me a lifetime discount for being the customer who turned a canceled wedding into criminal justice. I took them up on it and now do an annual solo cruise to clear my head and plan my next year's strategy. People sometimes ask if I regret any of it. The relationship, the public drama, the legal battles. The truth is, I regret not seeing it sooner. The red flags were there from the beginning. The way Sierra never offered to pay for dinners despite her PR salary. How she'd redirect every conversation about future planning to my assets. How Evelyn treated every interaction as a financial evaluation. But regret is just tuition for life lessons. My $25,000 education taught me that love and assets should be separate conversations, that ultimatums are just poorly disguised threats, and that someone who truly loves you would never demand you prove it by signing over your life's work. The condo is still mine, every square foot of it. I watch the sunrise over Lake Michigan every morning from my balcony, coffee in hand, grateful for the instinct that made me pull out my phone that night instead of pulling out a deed transfer form. The view is spectacular, but the peace of mind is priceless. Sometimes, when I'm standing there watching the lake, I think about that moment when Sierra said I had 1 week to decide. She was right. I did need a week, not to transfer my deed, but to transfer my entire life away from someone who saw me as a retirement fund rather than a partner. That week gave me time to document everything, protect my assets, and build the case that would eventually help 5 other men recover their losses. The financial abuse she accused me of, it was projection. The real abuse was demanding someone prove their love through property transfer. The real manipulation was using a wedding as leverage for asset acquisition. The real crime, well, that's now a matter of federal record. My nephew Leo, still the beneficiary of my will, Jokes that I should teach a course on strategic relationship asset protection. He's not entirely wrong. In my consulting work, I now include a module on personal asset protection for high net worth individuals. The first slide is always the same. The cost of prevention is always less than the cost of recovery. The $25,000 cruise? I've taken 15 cruises since then, all on that original deposit credit and the lifetime discount. Each one reminds me that sometimes the best investment isn't in what you acquire, but in what you prevent from being taken. The wedding that never happened saved me from a marriage that would have cost me everything. And that view from my condo? It's never looked better than it does from the deck of a ship, knowing I'll return to a home that's completely, legally, unquestionably mine.